Doom and IDTech need no introduction, both intrinsic to the first-person genre and in the 90s pushing PCs into the 3D gaming landscape. Doom the Dark Ages is pushing forward again, being the first in the series to require ray tracing hardware. Now under the hood, IDTech 8 is a clear iteration over the previous entries and shares visual elements from the 2016 reboot and Doom Eternal. The team have built and expanded on the prior engine while still relying on core features such as virtual texture maps, dynamic lighting, procedural destruction, dismemberment, and a flesh and bone decal system. But now the game has expanded both vertically and horizontally, with the biggest levels and story of any Doom game before. As well as ripping and tearing as the Doomslayer, you can now battle Hellspawn in a gigantic mech and even go full Panzer Dragoon with your own dragon ride. Both design aspects that have pushed the engine's memory management, level of detail, polygon count and streaming system significantly beyond any previous entry. Environments are impacted more by your wrath, leaving giblets, destruction, blood and gore in the wake of battle. Building on Eternal's Gib system, Dark Ages extends more variety as enemies break down from impact, exposing bone and sinew, using a vertex blend of meshes and decals that is even better this time around. Many objects and architectures can be destroyed now, procedurally breaking down stone pillars, walls, wooden carts and more. Many of these are real time and dynamically happen during gameplay, some scripted, and then the pre-canned physics sections we saw in prior games also occur, mixing up the techniques to create a more dynamic and physically based game than before. This enhanced destruction is improved further by the excellent particle effects system and colour coordinated alpha effects for battle. The game's visual signature is clear with a more medieval facade now. The bulk of the cannon fodder you lay wait to during your crusade is similar to before, just better constructed, rendered, animated, and ultimately laid to rest in style. Now the single biggest technical change Doom the Dark Ages ushers in is hardware accelerated ray traced lighting, RTGI, and reflections. Yes, ray traced reflections were added in a patch for Doom Eternal across PC and current generation consoles, but the difference is RTGI has been built into the game's lighting by default and therefore requires ray tracing hardware to run. Meaning this game cuts off many PC gamers at the knees for entry and also explains why PS4 and Xbox owners miss out. At a base level, all lighting is calculated via real-time dynamic lights and ray-traced global illumination, allowing the excellent physically based rendering materials, PBR, to shine and diffuse far more accurately. Now, the light bouncing off reflective marble floors, water bodies, blood, refracting through glass or diffusing across wood, skin, stone, metals and mud is even better. The variety of areas, surfaces and scenes give the engine the chance to push even further than before, and thanks to the entire engine's lighting model being centralised around ray tracing, this offers superior accuracy and economies of scale. The ray tracing irradiance data can be used to calculate both direct and indirect light, including colour bleeding from one surface to another. Shadow and ambient occlusion are also part of this, improving concave areas, making them much darker, allowing light to attenuate across corners, crevices and even enemies in the game dynamically. The game still uses cascaded shadow maps with a level of umbra and penumbra feathering, but no contact hardening. Ray Trace reflections are a PC exclusive, enabled from the medium reflection setting upward, reflecting across many surfaces and roughness levels. They include both static and dynamic objects such as ghouls and NPCs, but all versions fall back to screen space reflections for alpha effects, animated textures such as flags and particle effects, which is far too expensive to be included within the BVH and ray intersection calculation for a game that targets 8 milliseconds or less by default, even in the high PC space. The lack of these on all consoles, including the PS5 Pro, is a shame, and it does degrade from the visual quality the engine can reach, meaning as great as the console versions still look, there is no doubt nor surprise that a high-end PC hardware is where Doom the Dark Ages shines brightest. Now the final piece of the IDTech 8 jigsaw is full path tracing, last seen in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which uses a fork of IDTech 7 as its engine. The feature was exclusive to 12GB plus RTX GPUs, and sadly this was not ready for review and even launch, but it will come in a later patch, only enhancing the already superior PC version further, unifying more of the game's visual construction whilst moving further forward in that physical accuracy of the game's light and material quality. Aside reflections, which change most from low to medium, most objects available are best balanced with the combined settings option, which scales from low to ultra nightmare, but I'm not convinced all the rungs work correctly, specifically anything above high. Shadow map quality only marginally scales in resolution, cascade and filtering quality as you move up the level, with low being very pared back and medium being quite soft and lacking definition of the higher options. Beyond high though, I could not see much change at all, potentially resolution and cascade depth aside. Now they can be quite temporally unstable even on the PC's best, and even with the game's TAA, which does soften the image a great deal, not helped by its heavy post-process look from per object motion blur, depth of field, bloom, and new volumetric clouds and extended fog volumes. It does at least help keep the image more stable, even at reasonably low resolutions, more on that in the console section, but in play, anything from medium upwards looks good, and from high to ultra nightmare, I struggled to find any meaningful changes, both in performance and visual quality. Now the game fully supports Nvidia's DLSS 4, which is recommended for all RTX cards, including the top-end 5090, 5080, and certainly the requirement goes down the stack to the brand new RTX 5060, which just missed out a chance of being in this testing. Sadly, the HDR implementation in this game is not well set up. Effectively, the black level is slightly too high, affecting the core contrast and art design the game has, being below the HDR levels in Doom Eternal. Until updated, SDR option is better by default, but maybe the team can patch this quickly. Starting with the top-end 5090, we can easily target 60 FPS plus 4K TAA Ultra. The reality is DLSS 4 is almost the same image quality for 25% or more performance gain. As such, using this at ultra settings, we achieve a 120 FPS target, even higher if frame generation is enabled. At these levels, resolution and frame rates and fluidity and input latency are far higher, at times almost 25 to 30 milliseconds faster than on consoles. In these stressful sections, it can dip below that 120 FPS target, but for the lion's share of the game, it certainly achieves it on this top-end GPU. Moving to the AMD RX 6800, we have to make some cuts. TAA with DRS offers better IQ than both FSR and XeSS, and we run at a 1440p DRS target at the high settings. We achieve close to the best visual settings, but resolution does take a hit, with it often being at or close to 1280 by 720, but it still looks good. It now targets 60 FPS as a maximum, and although it often manages it, even this machine paired with a 5600X CPU can dip below that level in the hugely stressful Siege Chapter 6 battle. Smaller, less packed chapters are locked at 60 FPS, with lower end PCs scaling down the resolution and visual stack as required. Now, as I have often demonstrated, texture pools are a big performance cost, and the game's virtualized texture system relies on them. The more you have, the better the detail, sampling, filtering and quality all objects will be, and the smaller, the worse they'll be. If you do exceed your VRAM limits, you will see this instantly or slowly as degrading performance over time. This will tank your performance to single digits. All four consoles only have a single mode and use the game's TAA and dynamic resolution scaling system. Now, starting at the bottom, the Xbox Series S struggles with the demands of the game. The ray trace lighting is far lower, level of detail, shadows, ambient occlusion and reflections, along with object geometry, and most impactful of all, texture quality and resolution. Now, due to the approximate 8GB of total application RAM available in the little Xbox console, its narrow bandwidth and far weaker GPU, many cuts that have to be made are hard to ignore. It only targets 1080p as a ceiling, but is far more often at 1280 by 720. It can scale up to a counted high of circa 900p, but it can also drop as low, often at 1152 by 648p, putting it close to the levels of the old Doom game back in the 90s on a 486DX2, and almost identical to the low settings on PC. Now moving up to Series X and PS5, we now target that full 4K output, which is true of the game's UI and final output target. However, like the Series S, they both spend all their time below this level. A counted high of 1440p was hit on both, with a counted low of approximately 1008p was also seen. But the game often sits at or just above 1080p on both, with a few shots reflecting a small advantage to the Series X coming in at 1080p, and on PS5 1008p. But this can also be the opposite case, as you see here. Now in play, they both look identical and share the exact same settings, which includes far better ray trace lighting, ambient occlusion than on the Series S, closest to the medium settings overall on PC. Now the PS5 Pro sadly only improves on these two consoles on the texture quality and resolution, thus the final clarity of image on display. From all tests, the visual settings are aligned with PS5 and Series X, which is closest to medium, aside reflections which are closest to low compared to the PC. But the PS5 Pro does offer a very clean and instantly superior image over the other consoles, with it hitting a counted 1800p high quite often and a 1260p low, but it often spends most time around 1440 to 1620p, which results in an image that is cleaner, more stable, and resolves more detail than any other console, drastically so at times. Achieving a good middle ground between high-end PC and consoles, sans those ray trace reflections, and is helped a lot by its circa 1GB additional VRAM. Thankfully, these decisions result in a game that locks to 60 FPS 95% of the time across all formats. Although both Series X and S can set their refresh rates to 120 FPS from the operating system menu, this does not allow the game to run above 60 FPS. Now using the Series S in its 120Hz output, we gain the benefit of some frames that are dropped, only requiring 8 milliseconds until the next new frame is presented. As this console is the most memory bound, in this mode we can see this, with it sometimes presenting a short, irregular cadence of 8, 16 and 8 millisecond frame times. Although minor, if you have a 120Hz screen, then I do recommend you set both Xbox Series consoles to this, as you gain slightly better performance due to the increased potential frame time. In the base 60Hz output mode though, we see slightly more dropped frames and tearing if you don't have VRR, but now it has to wait for the full 16 milliseconds to refresh, which causes slightly worse overall performance due to that inherent cost of VSync on all engines. Now most battles are 60 still, or a handful of dropped frames, but that Stress Test Chapter 6 Siege battle can again see the console hit the low 50s, mostly due to bandwidth and fill rate impacts, so do expect minor dips in battles on the little console, alongside the heavy visual cutbacks. Series X is even better, largely keeping at the required 16 millisecond frame time even in the 60Hz mode, but we do have some sections that can drop a frame here and there. But these never last long, happen often, and never go lower than the high 50s. PS5 is a similar story, just slightly worse, with it keeping a close lock on 60 FPS in the large majority of battles, but the biggest, most chaotic ones can again cause skips into 33 milliseconds and a worst case of the low 50s. Now here, the PlayStation 5 operating system does not override the game's output, so a 120Hz forced VSync window cannot be chosen like the Xbox consoles. And this means we cannot mitigate the dips on PS5 as we can on Microsoft's machines, although it does have VRR support, and those with a VRR screen should benefit to the same level as Xbox consoles. And you don't get tearing on PS5 with or without VRR, which can happen on both Xbox Series S and X machines. Now over this stress test, the Series X was less than 2% on average faster, but in the worst case here, it was 16% faster than the PlayStation 5, a minor but measurable win for the Xbox Series X in these most flamboyant sections. Now finally, the PS5 Pro reflects the team are likely still polishing the PlayStation code. Although better than the base PS5 performance, and certainly with high resolution and quality, in the same stressful sections it can dip closer to the mid-50s, although very brief and never over 33 millisecond frame times. It still leaves it running slightly worse than Xbox Series X, which should be far easier to achieve a locked 60 FPS on the significantly more powerful PS5 Pro hardware. But outside of these stress battles, we again see, like the base consoles and Xbox machines, a fully locked 60 FPS. Now I do expect patches around launch will likely bring PlayStation in line with Xbox Series X level of performance, but right now it's still not quite perfect. Doom: The Dark Ages is certainly a frenetic and impressive game, with a clear iterative approach to the engine upgrades. The visual quality and chaos that can happen moment to moment impresses from the technical effort to achieve this at such high performance and pizzazz on every platform, with super smooth frame rates and input latency. But there is no doubt that on a good PC the levels are ramped up far higher with better quality shadows, lighting, textures and full ray trace reflections, which are a big loss across all consoles, and path tracing yet to come. The resolution levels, TAA impact on higher frequency detail and ghosting, along with the reduced memory space, also lowers the potential image quality of all consoles. Only the PS5 Pro gets close in the console space due to its expanded RAM and far higher resolution at all times. The Xbox Series X and PS5 are still good, but the game's variable rate shading and DRS can cause some heavy visual noise in dense areas, soft and muddy textures, and a game that never convinces you it's running at 4K, even though that is its target. The Xbox Series S is the most impacted, with the game often hard to discern the details within each scene or battle. Base resolutions are closer to the original Doom, the effects are reduced, and although performance is good, this is not how the team would have expected the game to look. It still has issues on all formats though, reflecting work still ongoing. I had checkpoint issues on PC and console that locked me out of progressing without a restart of the level, grass and ambient occlusion flickering, and other minor but obvious polishing areas to iron out. The PS5 Pro performance level being another minor oddity given the hardware specs of the machine. It still delivers the goods, with ray trace enhancements being a pleasing upgrade over previous entries, but they do come at the cost of performance even on top end hardware. And as striking as this return to hell may be, that cost of entry may be hard for many Doomslayers to swallow. And that's it for all things IDTech, Doom and everything video game related. Remember, if you like what we do here on IGN Performance Reviews, then keep it IGN, and we'll catch you on the next one.